Get straight into our speakers. So, my name is Chris. I'm the current president of UXP Uk, and I'll just be briefly introducing the event. Our October event, so the penultimate event of the year, where we are looking at research through a different lens, or I guess in the words of Monty Python, now for something a little bit different, and you will get the feeling of that when you hear from our speakers. Just a very short introduction to UXP UK. We are the UK chapter of UXP UK, which is an international organisation. We have been going for around 18 years supporting UX in the UK. We believe the origins go back to around about November 2002, where there was a meetup in a pub, of course. Normally we are obviously a lot more social in our activities, but obviously given the current situation, we have been conducting most of our events online. Just to note, we are run entirely by volunteers, and we are always looking for people to get involved. We will shortly be advertising a couple of roles for communications and to support the mentoring scheme. So the mentoring scheme is one of the three main pillars of our activities, along with the events and workshops. The best way to keep updated with everything is to subscribe to our monthly newsletter on our website, on uxpauk.org. We have been holding the remote events since April this year. Obviously, for those of you who have attended the in-person events, we are keen to restart them as soon as possible. Given the current situation, of course, we can't really give a date for when they will take place again, but rest assured we will keep going in the remote format to support the community. So please do keep joining these remote events and supporting them. And thank you to all our attendees and speakers who are taking part. Our next event will be a celebration. It's been a pretty rough year, but we are going to celebrate World Usability Day on November the 20th. Sorry, November the 12th. So please make sure you keep an eye on the newsletter for that. Just to start with some bad news, unfortunately, one of our speakers, Ilyena, had a last-minute issue and was unable to make it. So apologies for that. There's no worries around health or anything. It's just unfortunately there was a blocker to him being able to present tonight. So he unfortunately had to withdraw. So apologies for that, but don't go anywhere because we still have a great event lined up for you. And on that note, I will hand over to Rosina and Rick, who have been brilliant and have curated this event and put it together. So over to you, Rosina.
Thank you, Chris. And we are absolutely thrilled to be hosting this event. I just want to say a big hello on behalf of Rick and myself. Welcome to Research Through a Different Lens. This month, we're going to be talking about, or at least shining a light on the different sectors of UX research. And we're hoping that whether you're a UX designer, UX writer, a UX consultant, or even a student thinking about what path to take next as a career, that you'll gain something from this talk. So we all know user research forms the basis of our work, and it brings us closer to our users and helps us develop and build products to meet their needs. Next slide, please, Chris. The next slide should actually be talking about the challenges in which we all work. So something that people don't talk about is challenges within the workplace of user research. Anyone can tell you on the different projects that we work on that no two projects are the same, and you never get the same set of participants walking through the door. Everyone can talk about the participant who's an overtalker or someone who is particularly difficult, but how are researchers coping in sectors where technology is always changing, where your products are heavily critiqued by fans, or in situations where users do not speak? That's what we're going to be hearing tonight from our wonderful speakers who will be sharing with us a day in their lives, or at least how they are coping with these particular challenges. Next slide, please.
Yeah, is that working now, or are we still?
Yes, it is.
Yes,
it is. It's working perfectly. So our first speaker is going to be Mark, who's going to be talking to us about the challenges of testing video games. And our second speaker is going to be Ilyena, who's going to be talking to us about UX and animals and the complex problems around that. And just so you know what to expect tonight, we're going to have our first talk by Mark, and then we're going to have a short, maybe 5 minutes for a few questions. If you'd like to ask questions, you can, of course, raise your hand. I believe there should be some instructions for you to do so below. And we'll be able to unmute you so you can ask a question yourself. Or if you're feeling a little bit shy and a little bit reserved, you can always type in the question into the chat, and we'll make sure that we ask it. Then we'll have the second talk, and there'll be another short period for questions then as well. And then towards the end of that, we'll have just a little bit of a conversation with the speakers, just asking them questions about how they came to be where they are, what their backgrounds were like, and what excites them about the future of UX. So stay tuned for all of it, because it's going to be good stuff. So we'll get started with the first speaker, and that's going to be Mark. So if we hand over the slides to him.
Okay, hopefully that's showing my screen. Is everyone still looking good? I've lost my my Zoom view, so someone can confirm they can see my slides. That'd be great. We good?
We can, definitely.
Perfect. Thank you so much. If any technical issues do go on, let me know, please, because yeah, like I say, I've got my my slide notes and my slides up, so yeah, any Zoom related things are hidden right now, I'm afraid. But we shall go on. So hello everyone, thank you Rosina for that introduction. Thanks everyone for coming along this evening to my talk on some of the most interesting challenges that you can face when user testing video games. For those of you who don't know me, as Rosina said, my name is Mark Friend. I'm a principal user researcher and accessibility lead for Sony PlayStation user research team based here in London, and I've been a part of this team for the last 7 years. And here are some of the recent-ish games that I've worked on, including some PS5 games that you'll all get to play in just a couple of weeks. My role primarily involves working with our game teams across the PlayStation studios, but I've also worked on a number of hardware and system software projects as well, including most recently work on the new PlayStation 5 DualSense controller. Before we dive into the challenges of user testing video games, I just wanted to briefly touch on the main similarities and differences between more traditional user research and games user research. I'm obviously not going to assume everyone's coming in knowing fully exactly what Go and games user research is. So the three core aspects of usability which traditional and games UI tend to share are effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. Effectiveness being that users can actually do what they want to do. They can complete tasks and achieve their goals. So do they know what to do, where to go, how to do it? Efficiency is obviously looking at how much effort is required to complete a task. And satisfaction looks at users' attitudes towards a system. Is it enjoyable to use, easy to use, and would they use it again? With traditional usability, we are typically, although not always, looking at a clear and well-defined goal, usually around some form of input-output, like a transaction. The path to achieving that goal should be well-defined, and the system should work well so that users can achieve that goal quickly and easily. Ideally, we want to remove as much friction as possible. However, that's not necessarily the case when it comes to games. The biggest difference between traditional UX and games user research are elements relating to difficulty. So, for example, no one wants to be penalized for selecting the wrong seat when booking their flight. I would make the process less enjoyable and would more than likely frustrate anyone using the system. Also, traditional UX needs systems to be immediately intuitive, but with games, there can be an element of learnability that you don't otherwise get for traditional UX. It's fine if if a player doesn't immediately understand a mechanic or a system or discovers a certain tactic over time, as that discovery of that information can be a part of what makes the game enjoyable. And for games, it's all about making them enjoyable and finding the right level of difficulty. Not enough challenge or no challenge at all, and the game probably won't be much fun. It'll be very efficient, though. And of course, one person's challenging but rewarding experience may be another person's frustrating nightmare. Difficulty is highly subjective, after all. We want to make sure people can move through menus efficiently, but the game itself should not be designed to be efficient. Rather than removing all friction and making the experience as easy as possible, we want the game to challenge players. We want some level of friction, but not too much. We want players to enjoy that friction. But how do you go about testing things like difficulty and enjoyment when it comes to video games? With large-scale multi-seat testing, which is one of the defining features of games user research. So here's our social room, or again, it would be if we weren't all working from home. This is probably a common sight for a lot of people. It's a room where a single user and a moderator can run one-to-one sessions, and the moderator can ask in-depth questions, get the user to kind of really talk in depth about the issues that they're having and get to the root of kind of every barrier that they're coming up against. And while this setup works well for some types of usability tests, it can be very limiting for others. For a typical one-to-one usability test, we'd be looking at usually 5 to 6 users. Obviously, thank you, Nielsen, for that. Playing for around 2 to 4 hours each, depending on the code that we have for them to play. With the one-to-one room setup, we can usually run a test in about 2 to 3 days. But what happens when there's more code for the player to play? Or you need statistical validity that you don't otherwise get with a small sample size. That's where multi-seat UX testing comes in. For us, that's usually around 20 players playing a game for about 25 hours each, which is usually across 5 working days. Means you can get through about 4 times as much code with about 4 times as many players and only spend 2 additional days in the lab. And multi-seat testing is great for assessing the difficulty of a game, as you need a much larger sample size to produce representative results compared to a UX test. I'll never forget the user test I did where I did 6 users on a difficulty test, and those confidence intervals were very big. But if you want to look at the appeal of a game, you're going to need more users still. We recruit 40 users. You need at least 30 data points to start assuming a normal distribution and do parametric tests. So we recruit extra in case of dropouts. Again, they're playing for around 1 to 2 hours of gameplay if it's the game's around first publishable. But that could easily be 20 hours or more if it's done later in development or even after the game is released. Multi-seat testing is crucial for games UR for conducting research efficiently and producing results in a timely manner. Game development moves really fast. We are normally debriefing with the team and sending over the report 48 to 72 hours after the last day of testing. So as an example, here's how our methodologies may change over the course of testing a single game. And so you can see how we test a game with up to 60 hours of content. So this example is from Horizon Zero Dawn. You can see at the top of the slide the data from howlongtobeat.com, which is a great website if you want to try and plan how long a game is going to take you to finish. You can see there the users on this website clocked in around 22.5 hours just for the main story, 44 hours for the main story and all the extras, and 59.5 hours if they went for a completionist run. In the early stages of development for Horizon, we ran small-scale one-to-one tests, again 5 to 6 users, to look at smaller sections of the game, like the tutorial or individual missions. We focused more on individual mechanics at that point. As development progressed and there was more content to test, we focused more on larger scale user tests, so again 20 users. We began testing more and more content, including full playthroughs of the game, as often as twice a month, as you can see from that large cluster, about halfway along the timeline. And especially leading up to the release in February 2017. That kind of coverage of content and turnaround would be impossible by only using one-to-one testing. So as the type of content and scale of the game changes during production, the way we run research also has to change. And the move from qualitative measures for one-to-one testing to... And so here it is. This is our 10-seat area, again, where we would be running tests if it wasn't for a global pandemic. As the name 10-seat area might suggest, it has 10 pods, each with a development kit and a PC to play the game code and provide responses on our questionnaires. There's a small touchscreen monitor as well for users to give quick feedback while playing so they don't have to tab away from the game. Other facilities like our lab in San Mateo can support 20 users playing concurrently, which means they can get through twice as many users or twice as much content in the same time that we would get through half as much of that. But how do you observe 10 people playing at the same time? This is where the mirrored area on the right comes in. In the observation room, we have a bank of monitors lined up, so you can watch each player's individual feed and additional monitors showing all 10 feeds simultaneously. As the game should be at a stage where players should encounter fewer barriers or progression blockers when they're playing, and the build should, fingers crossed, be more stable, we can be a lot more hands-off with multi-seat testing. And because we have a larger number of players and most of the in-depth questioning should have already been done during the earlier one-to-one tests, we can rely more on collecting data with questionnaires, which players will fill out at the end of each mission or at the end of each day. Although we can still chat to players one-on-one in a separate room should we want to interview them at this stage if they've done something particularly interesting or having particularly unique issues. We also record our own observations by watching the players on the monitors as well. And here's a closer look at one of our monitors. Or player monitors, I should say. We have a view of the game, so you can see what the player is doing, and that view of the game switches to a questionnaire when they tab over to fill that in. In the bottom right, there's a view of the controller, so you can see what they're pressing, which is particularly important to know if they're pressing the right thing when they're having issues with the game. We also have a camera for their face feed as well. It's mostly so we can see when they need help and they're putting their hands up. We don't do any facial analysis. It can be quite time-consuming, and you can never be 100% sure the emotion a player is feeling just from the facial expression. So Jimmy there, he could be having the time of his life playing Wipeout, but his face may not be giving away that data. We also have eye tracking installed on each of our pods to help us see what the players are or aren't looking at. But we use that more as an observation tool and don't do any analysis on it, as it can be very time-consuming. But it's good for confirming if players are noticing elements in the game that they should be noticing. And here's another look at the multiplex that we have with the 10 feeds going concurrently, so we can see all the players just in a single screen. It can be a bit overwhelming at first, but it's a really useful tool to watch everyone at once, which is much harder to do with 10 individual monitors lined up left to right. There's a lot of swiveling in your chairs and turning your head if you want to do that. But the great thing about this is if you spot a player doing something particularly interesting, you could then turn your attention to their individual monitor feed and focus in on what they're doing. Another consideration we have when it comes to appeal testing in particular is to use representative code. For one-to-one usability tests, we can start testing when the game looks something like this. We can get an understanding of the issues with the mechanics and if players know what to do and where to go, even when a lot of the game is still grey box or placeholder assets. But for an appeal test, we want to use code that looks more like this, representative. With a portion of the game that looks final, players can get a better sense of how the game feels, and we can find out what they like and dislike most about the game, as well as how much of an impact those likes and dislikes have on their experience, something that would be so much harder if we weren't using representative code. Because of the need to have some part of the game to look final, these types of tests usually happen a little later in development compared to initial usability tests. But usability and appeal aren't the only things that we look at for video games. We also run research on a game's narrative. It's actually not too dissimilar from a usability test. Instead of looking at the usability of mechanics and systems, we're looking at usability of a story. But it was an interesting challenge to set up the process of narrative testing, one that involved us looking outside of gaming to film and TV and script writing, and applying those methodologies to our existing processes. What we came across gave us the backbone for the process that we have today. We now knew what we needed to assess and what we needed to make sure the players knew. In terms of what we wanted to assess, we look at players' understanding of the story. So are the important events clear? Do players notice and understand the main themes and motifs? Do they pick up on recurring elements? And by the end of the story, do they understand what happened? Areas of disbelief within the realm of the story, of course, because any story could be very unbelievable depending on where and when it's set. But within that realm, did anything unrealistic happen? Did anyone act out of character? Did anything break the immersion? We look at the predictability of events. What do players think is going to happen? We don't get them to dwell on this, because otherwise, if they overthink, then they can start over-assessing the game and in a way that they wouldn't otherwise do if they were playing the game at home. So we usually don't spend too much time on this whilst they're playing. But also, did what happened match their expectations? Was the reveal or twist too obvious if there was one? And lastly, plot holes. Were there any story threads left unresolved at the end of the story? Any important questions that went unanswered? We also track interest and engagement at each act break or the end of each mission. And do opinions change over time? Do characters become more or less likable or interesting? And if so, why? And for adventure games, are there any dialogue choices or text labels that are unclear or lead to unexpected outcomes? And when we want to make sure players also know who the characters are, so their names, their backstories, what the role of each character in the story is. Are they the protagonist, the antagonist? Also things like their jobs. Are they a detective, a doctor, whatever else they may be? What the relationships are to each other. Are they friends, relatives, love interests, mentors, mentees? And if the relationship is positive or negative as well. Do they like each other or dislike each other? And if so, why? And what are their motivations? If they are the baddie, why are they the baddie? Why are they doing bad things? And what do they hope to achieve by doing those bad things? We want to see if any of this is unclear, and we want to find out if users forget any of this as well, and also if it's okay to forget some of that things. It's obviously perfectly fine to not remember 100% of a narrative of the game, but are they at least remembering the important parts? And as mentioned before, we assess this at the end of each act or the end of each mission, depending on where it's most applicable to ask. One area that we discovered that could be difficult to assess when it came to the narrative was the likability of the characters. Some characters are meant to be disliked, like Emily from Until Dawn, so sorry to all the Emily fans out there. And there are others that you're meant to love to hate. So just asking a player if they like a character or not, it won't reveal the full picture. When asking about characters, especially players' most and least favorite, we worked out that we needed to ask, to what extent did that character have an impact on your experience? The impact can be positive or negative. For example, you might dislike Emily, but say the game would be much worse off without her. So disliking the character doesn't necessarily mean that they should be removed from the story or the game. We also track, when it comes to characters, what players think to what the characters say and how they behave. What players think to the character's personality, and to what extent do they empathize with or care about that character. All of this gives us a much clearer picture of the likability and importance of the characters in a story. So how do we go about narrative testing? Firstly, it's important to point out that you have to do this as early as possible in game development. It's much harder to make changes later in development, as is with pretty much everything, to be honest. But when you have to re-record voiceovers and reanimate characters' mouths and faces, or even add new scenes that include performance capture, all of that can be avoided by testing early. For the recruitment, we also wanted to make sure the users were fans, or at the very least not rejectors, of the genre for the games, and also other media like films and books, especially so as players would not always be playing the game. As we were often testing early in development, before there's even a game to play, we would recruit users to read the script. This could be done, this could be a digital version of the script. We've used Twine, it's an example of Twine in the bottom right there, as that allows players to make choices in the same way they would in a game. So they basically kind of click through in a choose your own adventure style. Or even PowerPoint slides that give a summary of each scene or narrative beats. We also use a read aloud methodology. For these kinds of testers, it helped us as the moderator to know when the players were actually reading everything. And we could hear when they got stuck on something that they didn't understand, as they'd often make non-verbal noises or respond to narrative beats in a particular way. So at that point, you can ask them about something as the moderator. Otherwise, it's you don't want to disrupt them as they're reading a story, because that'll kind of throw them off. But to do the read aloud methodology, we had to make sure that participants were comfortable reading aloud to us. It sounds a bit silly, but makes a lot of sense. Users might be comfortable with reading to themselves and in their head, but reading aloud to a stranger might be quite anxiety-inducing, and it's basically a form of public speaking. We also needed to make sure that players were fluent in English, either as their first or second language, as the material would also be written in English. Also, reading aloud can be pretty tiring. So we made sure that the max session that we did was 4 hours, which did include time for breaks, and about an hour of that, depending on the game we were testing, was probably made up of interview time. But even that's pushing it, and it still can be quite tiring at that length. Relatedly, it's also important to make sure the players can finish the story in the time you give them. We found it's important to read the content out loud to ourselves to gauge reading speed, as you can read much faster in your head. So if we were basing our timings off our internal reading speeds, that would mean the sessions could run too short. And you can't run out of time, summarize the ending to the user, and then ask them what they think to the story. That's just a really bad idea. We've also tested interactive prototypes that play similar to games with placeholder voiceovers and visuals. But whatever we test, we make sure that it comes from the game team. The user research team wouldn't make a playable build for a usability test, so we shouldn't create a script or stimulus for a narrative test. That way, you're always sure you're testing the story exactly as the devs intend it to be told. And from running this narrative research, we found some interesting insights. Firstly, be prepared for users to not know or understand uncommon words, and if possible, replace them in the script for a more common alternative, or provide a picture as it would be seen in the game. During a script read, people with English as a second language may be unaware of very English words, and English speakers in general may be unfamiliar with words borrowed from other languages. I remember one test we did, we had to explain, I think, to every single user what secateurs or gardening scissors were. Information that could be unknown to the player needs to stay hidden in the script or stimulus when testing. Stage directions and character names can clue players into information they're not supposed to know and make it seem like the story is much clearer than it actually is. Thirdly, issues in the script are not always fixed by adding audios and visuals. They can even be made worse, especially if the hidden information is not concealed for a script read. Written descriptions can be a lot clearer than briefly seeing the same content on screen, and sounds and character voices may or may not be easily recognized when the audio is in the game, depending on how it is mixed. And lastly, new issues may appear where there were none before, like characters being forgotten. You don't see the name like you do in the script read and have to rely solely on appearance. Abrupt transitions may leave users lost and unsure of where they're meant to be, especially if there are no establishing shots. Content can feel rushed when there's no one. Content can feel rushed or more rushed when not going at reading pace. Important items may not appear on screen long enough to be recognized or understood. Dialogue and sound effects may be difficult to hear if not mixed well, and important information may not be visually prominent on screen. Elaborate descriptions at a script stage may make something clearer compared to a quick shot that it ends up being when the visuals are added. So items key to understanding the story may be missed, especially if it is in the background of a shot and players are looking elsewhere. And lastly, to go from a new process onto new technology. Games have the luxury of being at the forefront of numerous technological leaps forward. Pretty much after the military, we're the first ones to get all the cool toys, so it's often our job to work out how exactly we use to test them. But while technology can bring about new challenges for how to test it, sometimes you can rely on tried and tested methodology, and you don't have to actually reinvent the wheel every time. As an example, here's an overview of how we tested the PlayStation VR, spanning 3 years and many different methods, pulling from both games and traditional UX. We started looking at the ergonomics of the PSVR headset in 2013, over 3 years before its launch. A big focus of the early testing was ease of use. Could people put the device on and properly adjust it to get a good fit and see a clear image on the display? And could they take it off effectively? Initially, the whole project was secret, and we were limited to testing only with Sony employees, so we ran internal testing. In 2014, Project Morpheus was officially announced, and we were able to start testing with real consumers. This was also the time we started running one-to-one usability tests on the first wave of first-party VR titles, such as PlayStation VR Worlds, Tumble VR, and Until Dawn Rush of Blood, which brought about the question of how do you communicate with someone when their eyes and ears are covered? The answer is you don't really. You have to rely much more on the post-playthrough interviews, as you can't easily jump in during gameplay. And you can't really ask a user to keep an earphone out, as that would interfere with the 3D audio and could bring about new usability issues. Although we would let users know at the start that we would gently tap them on the shoulder if we had to talk to them during the game. Often this was mostly just so we could let them know when we had to get them to pause the game so we could run in and fix any technical issues with the build. And after 4 rounds of testing the hardware in our facility, we moved the test to people's homes to look at how the environment impacted people's setups and use of PSVR. In the home testing, the in-home testing was incredibly important. You control all the variables in a lab, but you can never know exactly what a user's home will be like and what issues the environment will have on the hardware, especially when it can be so vastly different. How their entertainment unit is set up, room lighting, space, all types of seating, all these were different in each home and had different impacts on the setup and the gameplay. In early 2015, we began testing the hardware in our facility with children 13 years and older, as the guidance for VR at the time was saying that kids under 12 shouldn't be using it. So we needed to make sure that the hardware would fit and could be used by the youngest segment of the audience. Then we looked at the packaging and setup at this point, which in my opinion was probably the most important research we did on the project. Ensuring that users can plug in and go through the first time setup without any issues is so important for new hardware, and I'll never forget how vivid those images are in my head of people struggling with all those wires and not even reading the instructions there, because as everyone knows who buys new hardware, instructions are there as a backup. You don't need them. But actually, as part of the manual testing, we utilized Write, with the devs tweaking and changing the instructions at the end of each day so we could retest and validate the improvements the next day. Moving on to 2016, the year that PSVR launched, we looked at the UI, both in the system software and for the demo discs, again with one-to-one tests. We also began performing competitor reviews with the Vive and the Oculus, which are both just launched, to see what we could learn from other commercially available VR devices. And finally, starting at the launch of PSVR in October 2016, we ran a 5-week diary study to give us an insight into how users would use the hardware over a longer period of time, and again, in the home environment. So even with testing brand new technology, we still were able to utilize traditional UX methodologies, both lab-based and in-home, to answer the research questions. And it wasn't just the hardware we had to consider when it came to the research. Everything around it needed to be tested, especially when it comes to a smooth and seamless first-time user experience. So in summary, Adapt research and research environments to match the content you're testing. More users and more content means it's probably better to run a multi-seat test. Methodologies from other industries can be utilized to create new processes. Industries share more than you think. Difficult questions have probably already been answered. You just have to know where to look. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel when you're testing new technology. Existing methodologies can work just as well. That's everything from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. That is so interesting. I know I've seen from a few comments in the chat channel as well that everyone is pretty much agreeing that all of this is really fascinating and a lot of things to think about. So I'll go through some of the questions that we have in the Q&A. Just so everyone knows, I'll focus on ones to do with research first, and then ones to do with games second, just so we make sure that we get that out of the way.
Sure thing.
So one of the questions was from Mark, who asked, how do you recruit participants for these tests, especially given the current climate?
So we're very fortunate that we work with a very good recruiter who is very good at his job. Essentially, we are mostly using the same kind of process as we were before. We just have new kind of measures in place, questionnaires to make sure that they've not actually come into contact with anyone recently, that they're not displaying any symptoms. We're also paying for their transportation to our lab as well, just to make sure that they can, well, private transportation, so like taxis and hire cars, again, just to reduce the amount of possible contact they can have with other people. Then we've rejigged our lab, so we're actually in a temporary facility at the moment where we have set everything up so the moderator can be at a significant distance from the participant. We've got, I think, perspex screens between the researcher and the participant. Masks being worn 100% of the time. There's additional cleaning measures in place, hand sanitizer stations. We have the ability to, we have a streaming and on-demand video platform for our research, which means that we can have the moderator in the lab with the participant, but the note taker at home. So that minimizes the amount of people that we have in, both traveling to central London, but also coming in contact with each other in the lab. And then, just working remotely to produce the reports is kind of the other end of that, where we're, again, making sure we're limiting the amount of time we're coming into contact with people in the outside world.
Mm-hmm. And we have another question here from Daria, who says, do you consider to launch anything without UX research phase? I guess, do you launch anything without having done any previous testing?
No is the answer to that. And I think pretty much for any industry, no would be the answer. I think making sure that it's usable is, or at least having tested with the end consumer is probably one of the most important things you can do. And I know as a user researcher, I'm incredibly biased. And of course, I'm going to say that. But because, especially with COVID as well, we've been doing a lot more expert reviews. And even back when, in the before times, we would still do some expert reviews, but it would never cease to amaze me. You could prepare as much as you could. You could use the game, or in my previous job, the website or the app, as much as you could. You could try to pretend to be a user with as many issues as possible, but guarantee at least one user will come in and do something you've never seen before or never expected them to do. So yeah, having actual people in to test things is so important, just because you can never predict how it's going to be. And the worst thing you can do is to launch something and then to see on social media or wherever constant posts about issues that could have been prevented had some user testing occurred.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I know we have Luciana, who's raised her hand. Chris, could I have your assistance with making sure we unmute her? Him or her, that is.
Yep, Luciana.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Thank you so much for having me. And I work here in Brazil with a video game company as well. So my biggest doubt, it would be like, here we do not have a COVID situation that is established. So we are working from home still. And I wanted to know, how did you deal with playtesting on a remote way, especially playtesting with more players?
So that's actually one of the limiting factors with the situation at the moment, is that we're unable to really run multi-seat testing as we could do. We're kind of at a point where we can do 3 concurrent users. However, we're minimizing the risk wherever possible. That, I mean, first and foremost, it's our health, the health of everyone else in the company, and the user's health is all the utmost importance for anything that we do. I think it really depends on what you can do. I mean, having screens between different stations, hand sanitizer, extra cleaning of equipment. I think things like VR is very tricky right now. Anything that is shared between people, like headsets, is I'd be very cautious about doing anything like that. If it's controllers and you can like sanitize them or even have backups and swap, like rotate through them, I think all of those things are really good practices. But I think, admittedly, there is definitely issues with that. But for the remote side of things, one of the downsides that we have, especially right now, is that we're heading into a console launch, which means that not that things aren't secret anyway, but oh my gosh, things are so secret right now. And because of that, obviously, we want to mitigate leaks as much as we can. So really, the only kind of large-scale remote testing we've done so far has been with Dreams, which came out in February, which feels like a lifetime ago. But because that's a publicly available game, we're able to do certain things on that platform of the game itself because it's already out there publicly. For other things, we've tried doing work through kind of PC builds of the game and trying to pushing things to or live streaming things to different users. But we've also found that one of the ways we've been able to do it is with our QA. They are not obviously the ideal users because they have a knowledge of games that a typical user don't or doesn't have. But because they are internal and they are often sometimes available, not to say QA is not available, they do work incredibly hard. But at the right time, you can often get quite a few people from QA to run concurrently. So things like that is another way around it. But yeah, to be honest, remote large-scale testing is something that we've actually quite struggled with, and it's not something we've really been able to overcome. We're still kind of looking into wherever we can, but it's like right now we're kind of mostly focusing on the smaller one-to-one researches wherever we can.
Thanks so much for your answer.
No worries.
Great. And I'll focus on getting just another 3 more questions for you. So there's one from Johnny who asks, on the lab testing, have you tried to collect any bio data, so things like heart rate, during game test sessions to understand the emotional responses to narratives and plots?
So we actually haven't done that with regards to narrative yet. It could be an interesting area. We did look at biometric feedback for usability, or to run alongside our data we were collecting for usability. But we found that it wasn't, this is kind of us personally, other people may have different experiences, but we found it wasn't really adding anything substantial to the data that we were already collecting through the questionnaires. And also it takes a very long time to analyze. So again, with the turnaround for games, it can be quite a, we kind of want to eliminate any areas where it's going to take too long to kind of produce results, because with, and I'm sure it's the same for other industries. I've been out of web for a long time, so I don't know if it's the same for web these days, but yeah, the turnaround is incredibly fast. But I think there could be some interesting use cases, especially for, seeing how people react to the narrative. But I would imagine you would have vastly different responses for biometrics for a script read than you would for playing the game. So I mean, that could be an interesting kind of process test to find out what the differences are. But as of right now, it's not something we've looked into, but it could be something interesting. So yeah, maybe something we'll take a look at some point.
And then we had a question here from Georgi, I think, possibly. He says, or she says, thank you very much for your talk. I'm wondering how much of the gender perspective is considered or addressed. I'm supposing this is throughout the process. So are there women or females involved in the research, and are female participants counted for?
Yeah, so we try to be inclusive as we can with our research. I mean, I'm sure there are, but it's not often we notice great differences in feedback between male and female respondents, or male identifying and female identifying respondents. I'm sure there are for certain things, but in general usability for being able to use certain weapons or understand where to go, not so much. We do always try to make sure that we are recruiting not just all male identifying participants. It's something we've always been very cognizant of. So we do aim for like an absolute minimum of 25% female identifying or non-binary participants. It's not always the case, but it's always part of our recruitment criteria to try to make sure we do have a spread of genders. It's not just 100% male identifying participants.
And the last question, here somebody anonymous asked, is the player's mental health and well-being status or emotional status something that you measure too? I guess this is with the longer sessions that you hold. And if so, what framework do you use to find most useful, or what measure do you use to find most useful when measuring that?
So I'm going to answer the question, but I don't think it's in the way that the person asking it wants it. So really for us, the kind of the mental, oh, well, maybe this is the respondents anyway. But in terms for us, we do try to make sure our participants are looked after while they're with us. So typically because we have a 10-seat area, the way that we run testing tends to be, we'll have 2 groups, a morning group and an afternoon group, each consisting of 10 users. They'll play for 4 hours in the morning, and then Group B plays for 4 hours in the afternoon. That will make up a full day of testing. Within that 4 hours, there is always a mandatory break about halfway through, but we also encourage users to take additional breaks should they wish. We put out refreshments, fruits, and chocolatey snacks for people who are less fruit inclined. For people just to kind of snack on should they wish. We also have free drinks in our lab as well, so people can help themselves to water or to fizzy drinks. But I think mostly it's just encouraging them to take breaks if they want, particularly with the VR testing as well. There's obviously a lot of research into simulated sickness and making sure that people don't push themselves through to a point where they feel physically unwell. So we're usually, typically with our intro spiel, whenever we start a test, we always tell players, like, this is going to be pretty much how it's going to flow. We'll play for like an hour and a half. We'll have a break. We'll play for another hour and a half or 2 hours, and then tell them to take regular breaks should they want to. We do find that some people, just because it is an unreleased game and it's that excitement of playing something new, do tend to push themselves, but we try to keep an eye on players who haven't had breaks, and if they're not taking them, do encourage them to take a break. But the fact they're only coming in for 4 hours maximum a day, I think helps. I think there are other places that will run full day testing and do 8 hours a day throughout an entire week. I think things like that can be more physically draining, but that's one of the reasons. It's kind of partly by limitation of our setup, but also partly, I think, it does go into the well-being of the participants. So hopefully that's answered your question.
That is great. And I just wanted to say again, thank you so much, Mark. This talk has been so informative. I think we've all come away with a little something different, whether it's from the narrative testing to just the different ways that you measure things. It's been truly, truly insightful. With all the questions that haven't been asked, what I'll try and do is towards the end, at the end of the second talk, when we have again another session with Mark, we'll try and dip into some of these questions again. So thank you for that. And now we're going to proceed to the second talk with Ilyena. So we'll carry on from there. So thank you again, Mark.
Oh, there we go. Let me just get my presentation on. Okay, can you see?
Yes, we can.
Okay, let me try and close down. It always spams so many windows. I'm just trying to get it so I can still see people a little bit. Okay, yeah, so that's a bit of a hard talk to follow, but I'll give it my best. Yeah, hello. Not now. Sorry, my dog started to think I'm talking to him. I'm Ilyena Hirskyj-Douglas. I'm a postdoc researcher in Aalto University in Finland. Before this, I did my PhD and research at the University of Central Lancashire in the north of UK on building technologies for dogs. My research with animals has now really spanned over sort of 7 years, where I look at building sort of novel technologies that enable animals to control computer systems in some way. And from this, I sort of try and get what we can mean and gather from these technologies and what this can tell us about animals. So from a user experience perspective, I'm really sort of interested in what is meaningful and relevant experience for animals with technologies, and how can we measure these experiences. So I thought, like, rather than list all of my research or technology that I make, I would, I mean, you can find me on Google and things like this. I thought today I would sort of tell a research story, actually, of the process that I go through when designing and building technologies for animals. So today I'm going to start with, the whole story is going to be on the work I've done with Rosa Pittinen, who's a student of mine. And I'm hoping that this story will help some of you open up, question, and sort of reframe your definition of user experience. So our story really begins with the humble white-faced Saki monkey. And this is a small species of monkey who spend their lives in sort of the understory and lower canopy of the forest. They mostly eat fruits, nuts, seeds, and insects. And our protagonists in the story are actually 7 white-faced Saki monkeys who currently live in Helsinki Zoo. There's 3 females and 4 males, and they live in the Amazonian house there. Now, these monkeys largely already actually have all of their needs met by the zoo. So when I came along, we started to really think about what sort of technology would these monkeys like, what would be meaningful in their life, and how do we really add something beyond their standard enclosure. In their enclosure, they already have various things to play with, such as pots containing things where they can forage and eat. They also have things to climb on and trees and branches, and they also have inside and outside spaces. And obviously, as monkeys can't speak and sort of answer what technology would you like question, we decided to really begin our process by actually asking the zookeepers who look after monkeys and work with them in the day-to-day basis. And this is sort of a very similar method to those done with very young children or those who care for other humans, where you would ask another person to speak on behalf of them. So we did this sort of big requirement gathering questionnaire and asking what keepers wanted, where they produced this lovely list here. And this included something that was enriching, so something that improved the quality of life, something to monitor their health, something that had, and this list actually goes in order with the most important things at the top, something that had no negative effects, something where no training was required, as the keepers felt they didn't really have time to train monkeys to use technology. They wanted something that could monitor the animal as well as something where they could see the animal through. So monitoring on both sides of things. And the system also needed to be not so easily breakable, not so easy to use that the monkeys will get bored and not use it, or not so hard to use that it would become frustrating. And lastly, they were worried that it would become addictive, so to avoid this side of things. And so from this list, we really started to think as a group on various sort of ideas. So you see just some of like our drawings on the right over here. And we thought of things like balls that they could groom, so building from the normal grooming behavior, fidget cubes that could challenge them mentally to look at what they want to play with, trees or branches with various colors or different textures built in, music systems, a monkey call video system maybe, something so they could phone another monkey or talk to each other through this. And Rosa, who was my student at the time, really decided that we should really focus on sound systems. And while music has been played for other species other than humans for a while, for instance, people often leave sort of their radio on for their dogs at home, for example, it's also actually been researched with animals, where several studies have already been conducted with sound, but they really showed these conflicting results with primates. So in generally speaking, often playing human music and naturalistic sounds to primates had these very positive behavior effects, but some primates didn't really discriminate against sound and white noise. And people have also made custom sounds or musics for primates, including things like monkey calls or those that involve predator sounds, which have these varying results. So when we researched and thought more into this, we sort of began to realize that although musical systems currently made for primates didn't really allow them to choose the sound they wanted in their own home, or if they did allow them to choose, it was only really between 2 sounds. So in essence, how sound preference tends to be worked out with monkeys was to play the music and then just see the effect of it. And as Rosa put it, you wouldn't be so happy if music was just blasting in your home randomly all the time, even if it was music you liked. So we thought there has to be a better way to really test music and sound preferences. And so it was really on this line of thought that we began to realize we really need to give these monkeys more control over their experiences and control over the sounds. And so we thought, here's like a really grand challenge. Like, how do we build a system that allows a monkey to experience sounds? So the idea we actually settled upon was to build this music system for monkeys. However, we started to think, really, what does this look like? For humans, we have headphones, but this isn't really sort of possible to give all these monkeys or so like friendly to do. And how can we build these systems so monkeys can have these sort of integrated set of experience with music in these technology forms? And answering all these questions is really sort of these huge complex problems. So we began breaking this down first into the actual form of the technology and seeing how the monkeys interacted and experienced this form, and then building the technology from there in this user-centric fashion. I mean, we all know as like user experience experts that experience is facilitated by shape, design, materiality, and all these many different facets. But we really started to think here, how does this affect the monkey's experience of music? So seeing as we were going to do sound, we first started thinking what shape would retain sound. And this was so that then if a monkey wanted to listen sound, they could go or use the device, but also that the sound then didn't travel out and disturb the other monkeys around it. So it would only be the monkey that triggered the device that would hear the sound. And we did this really because we wanted to really have a form of the monkey consenting or agreeing, or however you really want to frame this, to listen to the sounds. And also because then if they didn't like it, then they could just leave, not go near the system. So they had this element of choice and control. And so you see from this sort of base, we started thinking about the monkeys in this very much autonomous way. And this is actually very important towards animals living in zoos, because they often actually don't have very much control over their lives or environment, or make very many choices. And it's speculated that by giving animals in zoos more autonomy, this can really help in their everyday happiness and health. So we settled on these two shapes you can see here, this parabolic dome form and this tunnel form. And when we were making these forms, we also thought about actually the material. As you can see here, we use a lot of perspex and we use wood. And we found that from the keepers, the material actually forms an important part of the experience for sakis, because they don't like enclosed spaces. They typically live kind of high up, and so not so much on the floor. And they also were worried about them slipping. So we use this see-through plastic actually to open up this space, and wood is something that's very eco-friendly currently in their environment and is very non-invasive. It's worth noting that monkeys also sort of bite, pee, scent mark, and chew everything. So systems have to be made in a way that they couldn't pick off the glue or tape or any part of it. We then actually tested these different forms with this white-faced saki group over 16 days using a video camera to record. And then we also used like in-person observations to measure the saki's interactions. And you can see here is the tunnel device in the middle, and then on the right, you can see the dome with the tunnel device above it. And we initially actually observed a very high novelty effect. So of course, new structures inside the enclosure is always going to get a very good investigation by these sakis. With the tunnel, the sakis would bite the screws, the side of the tunnel, they grab the tunnel, they sit inside of it, especially to look through to the other bit of the enclosure through the perspex. They also use the tunnel together and would chase each other through the tunnel and groom in there. For the dome, this was initially bitten, grabbed, and touched, but after 2 days of the 16, this was actually just largely ignored, as the tunnel instead became a sort of frequent place to hang out. And so it was really from the sakis' behaviors that we decided that we should then use this tunnel form, taking guidance from their way of life. And it was this way we sort of tried to involve them in the design process and getting insights from their experience. Ooh. Just mute this so I don't hear all the background sounds here. So from this sort of monkey interaction, we then built this fully functional system which recognizes when a monkey goes inside and will trigger the sound or music. And you can just see this is just a video of the system here. Monkeys like to sit on top of the Nest camera, so this is what you see climbing down at the moment. It was in this way we sort of designed the system to actually how the monkeys moved. And so if they sat anywhere inside the tunnel, it would trigger the sound. So the monkey sat in there is currently listening to something at the moment. And the device would then log this triggering automatically and save this actually online for us to view and analyze remotely, so we didn't need to go inside the enclosure. To test the psyche's preferences, we first played them no sound for 1 week, so they had nothing on there. We then iterated over several weeks different types of sounds in these sort of weekly routines. And here we really aimed to sort of test different sounds that had different frequency spectrums to try and investigate what sounds they were triggering. Now, this is like on a quick side note here, and I promise this is just gonna be like a quick detour from this monkey story. The recognition system that we actually use for monkeys was actually one I originally built for my dog to recognize him and play him TV when he was in front of a system I built called Doggy Vision, which you can see him just testing there. And I built this actually so that he could control his own TV while he was home alone, so he could choose to turn it on and off and what to watch. And the system was designed to recognize him over his fur, which can really distract from sort of most recognition systems, and also not to trigger when he was asleep. So this was sort of ideal for these very furry Sakis. But anyway, this sort of detour was just really to show that sort of systems and methods that we develop for one animal, human, animal, or otherwise, really can be applied across animals. Okay, so back to our sort of like main monkey music story. So we did use our method of this weekly testing and iterations and changing the music every week. And we measured also both the amount of times the monkeys triggered the music as well as how long they used it for. We tested, like I mentioned, silence at first, then we tested rain sounds. We tested sort of very zen, calming music. We tested electronic music, and then we also tested heavy traffic sounds. Comparing the monkeys' usage of the tunnel over these different sounds, we found that the Sakis actually triggered the traffic audio significantly more than silence, rain, zen, or electronic music, but there was no real difference in any other conditions. In other words, the Sakis chose to trigger the heavy traffic sounds more than any other sound or no sound. And this was sort of kind of like unexpected and also expected, I guess, because working with animals, I've sort of learned to keep this very open-minded approach. But as traffic really had no relevance towards their life experience, and it's rather, it was heavy Indian traffic noise from a busy street. So it's a lot of beeping, a lot of shouting. And so it's a rather sort of abrasive, heavy, loud sound. We didn't really expect that this would be the sound that they would choose to trigger. But I guess if we frame this out, what does this really tell us about monkeys' user experience with music and sound, and what do they like? Well, in terms of user experience, the system was designed so that monkeys could trigger different sounds. So our results really serve as an example that when looking at animals and their preference for audio, it's really important to include these various different sounds and not ones that we just think as humans that they would like, or from nature or human music, for example. As for why the monkeys preferred the traffic sound, we don't really know at this stage. There's no difference in the environment during the testing periods or grouping or anything like this. And the Sakis' interactions are actually constantly high with the traffic noise over the whole week period. So it has to be something with the noise or maybe something with the frequencies within it. What we did notice is the Sakis' interaction with the music was actually very short interactions mostly, and this is actually very similar to dogs and screens, and it was often only a few seconds long. But occasionally there were these very long interactions, meaning that audio used to enrich a monkey's or a primate's life really needs this flexibility between these long and short interactions. But when we dig into this more and when we reflect upon this, we really started thinking like, okay, if a monkey triggers a sound, what does this mean for an animal to really like it? Can we say this is a like or a preference? So after all, measuring an animal experience, we really need to capture an animal's preference towards things. And so while here we tested these different forms, we looked at the different materials and the different sounds, does this really get us any closer to finding what a monkey likes or how they would experience technology? Reflecting upon this, the Sakis would constantly, over several months of testing the system, would use our system, and sometimes very long periods of time. Sometimes they started sleeping in there and then grooming in there. They would use it in multiple monkeys at once, for example. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that they found the device enjoyable to use or the sounds enjoyable to listen to in the human sense of the word liking. One possibility could be that they just preferred the traffic audio and sort of merely tolerated the other sounds in order to access the tunnel device, where they just preferred the tunnel itself. And this is really complex because this means that the tunnel form then was so highly valued that they aim to continually use this structure despite this sort of potentially uncomfortable sounds being played in them. The Sakis could also just have simply preferred the system that played traffic audio, and all the other sounds were influencing them just slightly that we didn't notice. Regardless sort of any of these possibilities and alternative explanations, what this really does show is that we can never really fully understand the animal's experience and whether their preference in the human sense of the word is really akin to the human notion of liking. What we can do, however, is measure their preference, even if we don't know their motivation and their behaviors, and make these sort of best guesses. But this is all this ever really is, just a guess. So while we capture these animals' interactions with technology in some sense, what this meaning this has for an animal, their interpretation of the interaction and technology has really yet to be determined. In our case, what sounds would a Saki monkey expect to get from a computer system, and its choices when using a system are really still largely unknown. And this is especially nuanced as the meaning and experience of animals is actually interpreted through the human acknowledgement of what we see, as we can only recognize what we really know to be there. So it could well be that animals are having all these experiences that we don't recognize and thus don't really factor into our user experience work. As such, really defining and quantifying the user experience of animals is not really designing these full-fledged systems with finalized, complete results and complete answers to all of our questions, but instead it's really about focusing on these tiny components and acknowledging these really unknown spaces that we face as building and designing for someone other than ourselves. And it's really this acknowledgement and knowing and examination of these tiny spaces that animals have really taught me, and I hope this sort of research story has shown you, that also applies to humans. For too often, when we build technologies for other humans, we make these sort of grand fundamental assumptions that another human being is like us and that our experiences are unified and equally experienced across all people. Even with technologies that are designed for these inclusion and diversity, these are still within what we see as possible experiences. By looking at what user experiences in this way, we have to sort of remake and question these conscious decisions about what a user values, how we draw these evaluations, and the best way to meet the user's needs and requirements. It's in this way that I would really encourage you, and in the same way that I work with animals, for people, in the way that you would for people, to design, build, and craft these user experiences with an open mind for all possibilities, where we really need to be open and honest about sometimes a lack of understanding. And maybe then through this unknown gap, we can sort of discover these new experiences together in these complex places. So yeah, thank you for listening, and I would invite any questions.
Thank you. That was truly fascinating. And I think the best thing about it is just how you've leaned so seamlessly into that intuition of fully thinking about the experience of the monkeys that you were dealing with. That was truly fascinating. So I'll just go straight to the questions on the line. So we have one here from Connie who says, does designing systems for animals require that we understand biometrics or psychology of the animal user? So human factors, are they the important focuses? I think sometimes things like this are not taken into account as much when dealing with the fast-paced world of product design. What is absolutely critical to know?
Yeah, so obviously I'm a computer scientist by background, and so I'm never claimed to be like a vet or an animal behaviorist. And so this is why I do stuff like when I ask the zoo, what do you see for your Sakis? Or when I work with dogs, I would speak to the owner, and I also work with vets and animal behaviorists to really get their expert opinion on all of these issues. And I really feel that by getting this diverse team together, we can answer more of these questions. But I think you have to factor in all of these things, actually. Yeah, so excellent question.
And somebody says, have you captured what happens to the monkey before it comes into the music box? I wonder whether there's any social or any other triggers that might make them want to come to the box to listen to music.
Yeah, so the Nest camera actually was on the whole time, but it highlighted to us when the Sakis was inside of it. Because we tested actually for such a long period, we actually only looked at the triggering of, so when it was triggering the system. But I agree with you, I think it would be super interesting as well to look at these prior behaviors. We've been working again more recently with the Sakis, looking at different devices with them. And we noticed, like, for instance, there's a lot of quick interactions. And so we looked at the broader video and we noticed they were doing these very much chasing behaviors. And then we spoke to the zoo about it because we hadn't seen this behavior before in the previous instances. And the zoo actually told us that they had, the Sakis had actually been fighting with each other. So this was an instance. So I think this would be kind of valuable to also look at in the music project, because I think you're right, it gives you prior context to sometimes these different interactions. We looked at a lot of the longer interactions in detail because they were longer inside the tunnel, but we didn't look at the outside ones.
And somebody asks, I believe it's Yemen, sorry for the pronunciation if I got it wrong. Thank you again for your informative presentation. I'm curious if you've ever thought about putting a muted tunnel without any music in order to see the monkey's reaction.
Yeah. So this is what we muted is in no sound is what I'm just gonna. Is this what you meant? I presume this is what so. Yeah. I presume so. This is what we did initially. So the initial devices had no functionality in them. So because we wanted to see how they interacted with the devices and then build the devices from their everyday interaction as a way of sort of pulling them into the design process. And we then, when we put the technology in, you just saw it actually, it's just a panel on the side with all the technology in. We used this for a week without any sound, and we use this as a baseline so then we could compare the different sounds against each other. So yeah, we did do this.
That was one of my favorite bits, just hearing you talking about how they became accustomed to it, first started exploring it and then kind of getting adjusted to it. Another question on the line says, have you seen Christina Hunger, a speech language pathologist's work on teaching animals to communicate basic words and concepts via pressing buttons? If that can be applied to other intelligent enough animals, would you consider to use it for your research to find out if they actually like, I guess in this case, the sounds?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting problem. And I mean, I actually think about this too much, I'd say too much. I think about this because did you see recently there was that lady who had the board and the dog could press different things on the board. And I kept thinking about this in terms of effect, like how do you teach someone what liking is, and do you teach it on a scale, and how do you teach what the scale means to someone else? And so these are sort of the complex, why I've never done anything like this. And also with animals, you have this very complex motivation that if you teach them to do something, it's usually you teach them through food or through your praise or whatever reward you do, then it conflicts their motivation to do something. And so I sort of, the technology that I built was deliberately designed in a way where it mitigated against this bias, where we never taught them to use the tunnel or anything like this, to really get it more, I guess, like the purest view of liking without this human bias that would come from this teaching or training. But I think in the future, it would be important to do stuff like this, and I would really love to do stuff like this. I just can't in my head yet figure out a way to do this without biasing the animal through it.
And there's 2 questions from Melissa, who says, if you could pick any animal to design an experience for, what would it be? But also, to what extent does nature determine what is or isn't a good experience?
So any animal, it's what I designed for. So I have to admit, I'm like a little bit of a crazy dog lady. My PhD previously was in designing technologies for dogs, and it's just something that I feel is super close to my heart. It's actually how I got into this whole idea of animal technology. But I think for me personally, moving forward, and what I would like to see more of actually is technology for animals that really need it. So technologies, for instance, for animals that are in battery farming, or animals that are in not so good situations because of human reasons. I think those animals are really deserving of technology enrichment, and they're sort of a place that I think we can easily improve on. To what extent does nature determine what is and what isn't a good experience? I actually don't know how to answer that question. Yeah, it's a bit of a sort of nature nurture, I guess, maybe argument that, yeah, I don't know where to settle on.
And the last one that I've got, and then I'll sort of bring yourself and Mark together just to ask you both about your backgrounds, how you kind of came to be where you are, and what you're excited about in the future. The last question is from Penny, who says, could you tell which monkeys triggered the sounds? Maybe only the ones that really liked traffic sounds were the main parties.
Yeah, so we didn't actually go fully into this because a lot of the sakis look very similar, and you need sort of like really close knowledge and take a lot of time identifying them, which we didn't have, unfortunately. We could recognize one because their tail had like a white bit on, so it looks different. But I think this is something very much interesting in the future. I mean, we spoke to the zoo about it because sometimes when they do research with zoo, they feed animals different pellets of different colors, so they poop different colors, and the zoo talked about, okay, maybe we put like a marker on their head or something like this, and it was sort of a conflict, and we didn't want to disturb the animal too much in this way, so we didn't do this. I think it would be nice if we could automatically recognize the monkey, and I think this would be probably the next step to go, so it doesn't take this human level of encoding, but the system can automatically recognize, and then we could also make adaptive systems which could automatically adapt to that monkey.
Fascinating. So good. So I was going to ask yourself and Mark now just a few questions. So I guess a great one to start with is just, how did you get to where you are? Because that's something that people always ask. How do people get these great jobs or get to be in these great experiences and spaces? Could you tell us a little bit about that and what attracted you to this particular area?
I don't know if you want to go first, Mark, because I guess it's me who's been talking.
Sure, I can give you a break for a few minutes. So how to get started? It's a long and winding story, but I'll do the abridged version. Although it looks like my camera's stopped working, so hopefully I'll start animating soon. So I did a sociology undergrad, and I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life when I graduated with a sociology degree. It was also the time of the last big recession as well, so jobs weren't particularly great. My supervisor suggested I look at either a sociology and management master's degree or a sociology and community science master's degree. So I was a bit more interested in CS because I'm a big nerd. And yeah, it was mostly around how and why do people use machines, like the sociology of computer science. So it wasn't really like the coding side of things. So I had modules like human-computer interaction and understanding users and accessibility and basically everything that's my job now. But at the time when I graduated, I had no idea that was something you could get a career in. It didn't feel like it is kind of now, where it's really like there's a lot of organizations and groups and talks and things like UXPA, which kind of telegraph all this really important information. But back in like 2009, 2010, just like no idea. So yeah, after working in retail for about a year, I then, after a chance meeting with a PhD student whose thesis I was binding when I was working at a Staples, spurred me to think about what I was good at and what I liked. That I was like, well, the HCI module was the only thing I ever got a first in at university. Maybe there's a job in that, was my thought chain. And then, yeah, I started looking for jobs online. So it was all a case of realizing that there's HCI and information architecture and usability and UX and UI and all these kind of different acronyms for basically similar jobs. Then, yeah, I got lucky enough to land a job at an agency in Leeds called Simple Usability, where I worked for 2.5 years, doing UX, basically what I do now, but for websites and apps. And then, yeah, I basically saw a tweet from someone I'd followed because they'd written an interesting they'd written just an interesting blog post on their own blog about mobile phone game usability. And then, yeah, as it transpired, they tweeted about the job at PlayStation. And then after applying and doing all the steps, I realized they're actually part of the PlayStation team, but they never actually telegraphed that on their blog or their Twitter bio. So, yeah, it was kind of a combination of getting the right background and then getting very lucky with following the right person on Twitter is kind of my story.
That's really interesting. And Ilyena, on your side, how did you come to be where you are?
Well, I'm one of 5 kids, and my dad always promised that if we got a degree in some sort of wanting us to get an education, that we would get a dog. So actually, after I got my degree, I don't know if I can turn and see him right here. He's sort of checking out his bed at the moment. So I got a dog. It's a summary of things. And I was already studying. I just got a degree in computer science because I really loved programming. And I learned it actually from like a very young age and got very much into it. And when I was doing my master's and we had to think of our thesis, and they gave us this long list of theses to do. And I had this I'd been reading this, I think I'd read this one paper on animal technology, and I had this really good idea to then, okay, maybe I'll do dog technology. And I approached the thesis supervisor, and he said, no, in the end, you're crazy. No one does animal technology. And I was like, oh, come on. And then I approached, luckily, another person in my department who then fully believed in me and said, yeah, we can do your whole thesis on dogs and screens. And so I ended up doing my master's thesis on how do we sort of quantify a dog's interaction with screens. And then luckily after this, because of this, actually, she ended up offering me a PhD. And then I did it around dogs and screens. And then I came to Helsinki and I thought, okay, maybe I can do stuff with monkeys as well. And so it's just sort of developed into sort of my personal interests, I guess. Yeah, so it's sort of, I guess, similar to Mark. Lucky to meet the right people, but also very headstrong to push what I thought was something I wanted to do.
And I guess because you have such a unique role and such fun work, of course, but in terms of what your projects look like, so who the people are that you're working alongside, I know you mentioned sometimes in some cases it's zoos, but who are the people that you have on a project at any one time? What does that look like?
Well, I work mostly actually with a lot of HCI people, because a lot of the stuff I do, I mean, you could recognize it from a lot of the work that I did was just HCI methods just tweaked and sort of applied to animals. And so I work in a HCI department, my background's in HCI, and the research team that I work with is mostly either in HCI, but then I do sort of talk to these vets and work with animal behaviorists and all these sorts of other people like this. And so I sort of think the future of this, I mean, I think humans are naturally animals anyway, so maybe animal technology is just a bigger umbrella of HCI in the first place. So maybe I see it as sort of this reversal.
And with yourself, Mark, I guess in your industry, in terms of who's with you when you're doing pieces of research, is it traditionally the whole team? How are you sort of working at any one time?
So normally it's we're kind of in pairs on projects. So there'll normally be someone who is kind of quote unquote the lead and someone who's quote unquote the assistant, but responsibilities kind of scale up and down depending on kind of experience and how busy people are and things like that. But yeah, normally we're kind of paired up and then we'll work on the projects. Normally we try to get the same researchers on the same game throughout its kind of lifespan, maybe subbing in a third one every now and then just to have a fresh perspective. But it's obviously quite important for consistency, because then the development team, they have a consistent person they can kind of come and speak to and discuss things with. And then also you see the game evolve over time, so you can see when changes happen, because it's not always easy to get all of the patch notes and all of the change list from the from round to round that you're testing on a game. So having an eye for what's changed yourself is also really useful. But yeah, it's mostly kind of paired research. Then do the user testing. We'll write the reports as a pair as well, just because again each researcher is kind of bringing their own perspective of the same thing, so we can discuss the findings and kind of really drill down to what the issues were based on what the user said. And then it's just kind of working alongside the dev teams. They'll get in contact with the user research team. We'll set up kickoff meetings to discuss what they want to test and how we should test it, put together research plans for them. And then when the project's all done, we'll debrief and go through the report with them. And then the cycle kind of continues.
And I guess that's really interesting. But one thing I'm really keen to understand is, I guess there's so much that happens outside of a research project. So there's the doing the work, getting it done, but then there's the other things that come into play, sort of stakeholder management or trying to convince people of different things within the organization. Is there anything that came as a surprise to you when you started sort of working in your current role, or that you thought, oh, this is interesting?
So for me, I came in as a junior originally, and I've kind of worked my way up over the last 7 years, which has been quite nice. So you don't really do as much stakeholder management when you're just kind of starting out. You're still kind of finding your feet and kind of learning processes and stuff, but it's something you kind of gradually acquire over time, especially with that kind of working with a team. So you kind of become like an unofficial kind of project manager, and then kind of more kind of general project coordinator for a different team. I think the biggest surprise for me was how receptive the teams were to user research. I don't want to generalize, but I'm going to sound like I am now. But when I worked in web, a number of the clients that I worked with, some were incredibly passionate, and it was great to work with them. But a number of them, it felt like user research was kind of a checklist to get through, just to say they did it for their website. But for games, I don't think I've ever worked with a team where they haven't been incredibly passionate about wanting to make changes or understand what they need to do to improve their game. I think because there's probably this kind of looming factor of Metacritic scores and review scores, which aside from maybe like Trustpilot for businesses, but even that's a little bit different. But you don't really get that with kind of more traditional user research. So I think there's kind of a bit of wanting to make the game better for kind of it to be reviewed well, but also just in general, the teams I've worked with have all been really amenable and very happy to kind of work with us and kind of discuss research and kind of, I think as well, we've worked with, I think, all of our teams now for quite a long time. I don't think even with Insomniac, who we've just really brought into the fold recently as an official first party studio, we were still working with them when they were kind of doing exclusive games for us, but not part of PlayStation Studios. I think that the longevity of the research that we've done with teams also helps, because then you become very trusted, and they kind of understand the process, they understand you. And you kind of, I think it's partly just building that relationship over time. And again, that's not something that I did so much in my past life. A lot of it was, I think, especially because I was in an agency, a lot of it was kind of one-shot bits of research. There were a few companies we had on retainer and we worked with a lot, and I think they were some of the most passionate people we dealt with. But I think, working with games over a long period of time, it's kind of building that relationship and just how passionate the teams are about doing user research. It's not a checklist. It's something they really care about doing.
Which is always the best environment, I guess.
Yes.
And Ilyena, is that the same case with you, that it's always felt, have you come across any challenges in terms of either getting permissions or working with particular people, whether it's zoos or different stakeholders? Has your role in any way, have you come across anything that sort of surprised you in terms of challenges?
Well, I guess a lot of my stuff often requires multiple forms because I work with animals and humans, so I have to do both sides of this ethical side. So this is a bit sometimes challenging. But no, I actually think I've been very lucky actually, because I think the real tide is turning for animal technologies and how zoos are approaching technologies and how people are approaching technologies in their home for their pets. And so people have been a lot more, I mean, in the last 7 years I've been doing this, people have been a lot more receptive to technology, I mean, a lot of people have this argument, right? The technology is not natural. How can you use technology in zoos because you need to provide them with a natural environment? And I think people are sort of being open that technology can provide these extra experiences for the dogs at home, or dogs in a shelter, for instance, or a cow on a farm. And so I'm really sort of excited actually about the future of animal technology, because I see so many really cool application areas, and also that the tide's turning towards these acceptance in these areas.
Which I think is absolutely great. So I'm just going to thank you again, yourself and Mark, for these mind-blowing talks. They've been truly, truly informative. So we've come to 8 o'clock UK time now. So what we're going to do is we're going to say thank you again to everyone who's joined. It's been great to have you with us throughout the line. What we're going to do is we're going to be back on the 12th of November for the next event, if you want to join us then. But also, we're just going to leave the room open. I don't know if any of the speakers want to stay and take a few questions from people who may be here, but we'll close the line officially at, I believe it's 8:15. So it'll be about 15 minutes if people sort of want to shout some questions. So it's entirely up to you, speakers, if you'd want to call it, and I appreciate maybe a bit later somewhere else.
I can stay around for a little while longer, so I'm good to take a few more questions if anyone has them.
Okay, great. We'll open up the line. Chris, can I have some assistance just turning on the line and see if there's anyone else with questions? Well, they may not be. This may be the end of the evening. I guess I could ask you some of the questions that people mentioned now about a few things, like what you were most excited about in terms of games coming out over the next few periods.
I think Johnny has one about The Last of Us Part 2, which I think should probably answer. I think I saw that on earlier.
Yes. What do you think of the negative feedback on the storyline when players criticize the killing of Joel, the main character, too early? Is it something for the testing learnings?
Sorry, let me just get that question up as well. So the question there is around, is there anything we take from user tests around kind of feedback of negative comments like that? So it was the San Mateo user research team who handled the Last of Us Part 2 testing. I gave some feedback here and there, and I spent a day in the studio, which was fantastic. It's incredible to just be in the studio with a team. We're centrally located in London, so we're not really on site with teams unless we kind of go visit them. So it's nice to be there. So I don't think I can really answer your question. I can frame it a little bit around some of the narrative work we have done. The balance is always about, so with games, there is definitely design intent. There's always, the designers have an idea about what the game, they know, like, I don't know, just as an example, like in a Spider-Man game, you know that you want the character to web sling. That's kind of a core feature of Spider-Man, for example. So there are some things that are kind of a little bit immovable. And with narrative, again, story is a tricky one, because there's, for something like The Last of Us example, it would kind of mean rewriting the entire story, because that's the inciting incident for Ellie in part 2. And I think there can be a bit of a knee-jerk reaction from a lot of fans. And unfortunately with games, there is a lot of toxic online behavior, which is incredibly unfortunate for the industry. So I think, as with kind of all feedback, it's kind of working out what is actually negative feedback, what is kind of like that real negative feedback, and what is just people kind of having a bit of a moan about something. Because I think with usability in general, it's always kind of been one of my little sayings to myself is, but like, users don't really know what they want until they get it. So we've had user tests where, yeah, I'm sure other people have maybe familiar with the scenario of the participant just deciding they're going to design the product for you and say, oh, it should have this, and it should have this, and it should have this. And you kind of have to sit there as a moderator and kind of nod and smile politely and just know in your heart of hearts that's not the product. It's a different thing they're going to get. I think the same is for narrative as well. I think there are certain things that can be changed. So if you don't really understand the story, maybe there's the why is. I think it's always looking for the why. Why don't they understand the story, or why don't they like that a certain character is killed or killed off? And I think some things can be a little bit immovable, but I think other things there's room. There can be wiggle room, but I think some things can be a bit of an immovable point, and it's really just kind of what's the best you can make it with, kind of the thing that you're given in a way. Sorry that didn't really answer the question. I kind of talked around it. Hopefully that was kind of useful.
And let me check if there's any other questions. I know someone asked about whether you play a lot of games yourself in your spare time.
Not as much as I used to before I started working in games. Not for lack of wanting though. Yeah, I think it's just kind of work in general being quite mentally taxing at times. So in the past I would come home. Right now I move like 3 feet over there to my sofa, and I just have those kind of evenings where I just kind of want to flop and kind of not really do anything and just kind of veg out and watch Netflix. But I try to. I think it's important. And I think similarly with whatever industry you're in, it's good to immerse yourself in that industry. So I try to play a lot of weird and interesting games that, if possible, are a bit related. So the main area I work in now is accessibility. So whenever a game comes out that has interesting accessibility features, I try to make sure that I play that. Similarly with kind of interesting mechanics and things like that. So if we're working on I don't know, a space combat game, for example, then we'll go, oh, cool, the Star Wars Squadrons has just come out. We should play that and make sure we're familiar with what they've done. Because I think if you know what's happening in the industry, it can lead you to be more insightful and provide better quality feedback to the teams. I led the research for Blood and Truth, which was a game that came out 2 years ago for PlayStation VR. Previously, I hadn't really played that much VR, but at the time I started to lead that, I got myself a VR headset so I could play at home, and I bought all manner of VR games, lots of shootery games or first-person games, just to understand what the competitors are doing. And I think that definitely made me a better researcher for that project, because I could draw on the experience of what other teams, other studios were doing, and not necessarily recommend that London studio, in this case, do the same thing, but at least provide context for certain kind of interesting bits of information, or point them and say, oh, actually, well, we're having an issue with X. This other team has actually solved it in this way. So I think there's definitely a benefit for playing as much as you can, especially around the stuff you're working on.
And Ilyena, there's a question here. Somebody says, I'm approaching defending my thesis, and I'm curious about both career options. I guess this falls for both of you, from the academic side and the industry side. Could you please describe a day at work? So I guess for yourself, Ilyena, what does that sort of look like in terms of how you develop your projects, what you decide you want to work on, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm kind of very lucky in my work, actually, that Finland is very relaxed attitude I do a postdoc at the moment, so I have like a fixed term contract, and I can sort of decide what projects I want to work on and what I want to research into within various degrees. My day mostly looks like sitting on my emails, replying to a lot of emails, unfortunately, sometimes. I do a lot of reading as well, a lot of reading of papers, a lot of writing of different ideas. At the moment, I have a lot of Zoom meetings, trying to collaborate, which is super important in academia, to speak to other people and work. I mean, you can't be a one solid workhorse on your own. And so it's sort of trying to figure out how you mitigate and write and work with people that you can't necessarily have these very reflective question and answer session with. I guess everyone's in the same boat in that sense of things. And my days, because I don't have any fixed hours, actually, which can be, my dad said it's a curse. I think it's a blessing, because then you can have like very long days and very short days. So it's kind of a lot more, I guess, up to you on what you do, but it can also be a bit stressful, because you have obviously a lot of deadlines you have to meet, and because no one's really sort of monitoring you day to day, it can become a bit of a personal pressure.
So how do you find that you sort of keep on top of everything? Do you have a strategy or?
Yeah, so I have like a Kanban board actually in my office that I use, and then now that I'm working from home as well as on the board, I tried to do a virtual board, but I didn't find this worked well for me. So now I just have a notepad that says today is to do things, tomorrow is to do things, next week to do things, next month to do things. And then I have like an eventually to do things, which sometimes you try and push those things into the next plan. So it helps me structure, okay, so this is what I'm going to be tackling today. I just look at the next day of things, and it's a way that I can sort of manage all these multiple things, because sometimes you want to work in a coffee shop, and because I have all these different multiple locations now that I work in, it become quite hard to manage this digitally. So this is how I manage it.
That is so insightful. I love that. And Mark, on your side, I know you've expressed some of it in your talk about generally what your day sort of typically looks like, but if we took maybe a day out of this week, what does it look like in terms of how you're working, who you're working with, what you're working on?
Yeah, so it's really kind of more like every week or every 2 weeks is kind of more how we block our time. if we're on a project. So a review will normally be about a week's worth of time. A user test with preparation, moderation, and reporting will normally be about 2 weeks worth of time. And then it's kind of, it's working on different games. So you kind of move through the different games in every kind of weekly blocks of things. At the moment, actually, my week has been working on process documentation. So there's a few things that I'm kind of, I have a little bit of a break from research at the moment, because we're in a kind of an interesting period where we're a couple of weeks away from launch, which means the majority of our work for launch is done, which is kind of nice. After launch, we'll be hit with a tsunami of user research to do for the next wave of games, which I'll enjoy this time while I can. But right now, it's kind of working on back-end stuff, process stuff, documentation. Similarly, answering a lot of emails, doing a lot of meetings. We work a lot with Japan and the US, which means that quite often my days can start, normally they start around 9, but I normally start around 8, and then sometimes finishing around 8 as well, just to get in all the meetings with the US. So that's the downside of working from home, is that I don't shut down my laptop and leave the office. I'm more easily caught by people on Slack or Teams asking me questions. So yeah, it's a lot of kind of responding to people, and then my day getting completely derailed when a request comes in or someone says, oh, hey, do you know about accessibility for X, Y, and Z? And then that's suddenly my day is researching that and getting them an answer.
People don't talk about that enough, how you become the central point of information.
I know.
Come to you, just as you're sneaking past, about that piece of research. So everyone on the line, you're able to unmute yourself if you wanted to ask any questions to any of the speakers. I'm going to mute my line now, so you can go ahead for the last few minutes.
I'll jump in. I had a question I put in the Q&A about getting your first interview. Now, I'll tell a little bit about my situation. I have a boot camp where I went through for user experience design, but I found that I enjoyed the research portion of the design process more than actual designing things. And so I would like to transition into research, but I'd like your opinion on how best to do that.
I guess I can go first here, because I work, me and my line manager were the hiring managers for our team, so I have a bit of experience in this field. So I can mostly give it from our perspective. So we have quite a in-depth recruitment process. Our first stage is looking at CVs. So being Sony, a lot of in PlayStation in particular, we get a lot of people just applying to us because they think, oh, I just want to play games all day, which is a common misconception for a lot of PlayStation roles. Unfortunately, not the case. Most of my days, like I said, are writing emails and attending meetings, or watching other people play games. So after the CV stage, we'll then kind of normally do a gaming questionnaire and kind of get people to do a bit of analysis on games, so kind of like a mini UX review. And then from there, we'll kind of do phone interviews and face-to-face interviews and so on. So for us, it's kind of standing out at the CV stage, not kind of making there's a lot of common mistakes that I see. A lot of people often writing similar things, because I think that's maybe how people were taught to write CVs. I actually dug out my CV from 2010, I think it was, recently, and it was painful to read. But things just kind of standing out, making it clear, kind of like using your personal statement, I think is probably the key point, because that's the first thing people are going to read. So kind of getting across who you are, your skills, why you want the job, not making it seem like it's just a blanket application. And then for us, then the next stage would be like the questionnaire. So again, it's just kind of demonstrating your proficiency at that stage. And then really, yeah, after that, it's like if you kind of pass those stages, then it'll be on to kind of interview. For other companies, it's probably a little bit different. I don't know if it's going to be, it probably isn't the same as what we do. But I think certainly the biggest thing to land that interview is to just kind of have a solid CV and make yourself kind of stand out, make it memorable, but not like in a, yeah, you could just kind of making yourself clear. Like if you've done like boot camps or degrees or things like that, saying what you did in that. It's because we get so many people who say, I have a psychology degree. And you think, great, what modules did you do? Tell me more about this. What kind of research have you done? So anything where you can be specific to the role and not just say like, I am a hard worker, I am good at working in groups, I am dependable and reliable and good at detail, like that. Everyone says that. So kind of focus on why you're awesome and why you're awesome for that job. I think that's kind of the main tips I would give.
Thank you.
Hello, Mark. Can you hear me?
I can, yes. Hello.
Hello. Sorry for. Oh, thank you for all the answer to my question. That's just brilliant. We're currently doing some research for the games as well, but we are sort of focused. Large part of the research probably it doesn't call UX research, but we're looking at the context of how gamers play at their home, so sort of, you know, under what kind of mood or circumstances or time of the day they will play certain type of games. We found that extremely interesting. Is this something you guys will look at or mainly just look at in the lab settings?
So normally for us, it's the kind of the more lab-based research. Like I showed with the PSVR project, we can do and we have done much broader methodologies than kind of one-to-one or multi-seat usability testing. I think it's about applying it for the right project. So we did do some research for Dreams that was based like more long-term diary study stuff. But I don't think all games are relevant for that. I think it's more for hardware where we'd see us doing more kind of in-home diary study, those kind of tests, not necessarily for the games. I think you can get a lot of information about the games just from the lab testing.
Got you. All right, that's very interesting. Yeah, thank you very much, Mark.
It's okay. Not to say it can't be done though. I'm sure if there's a reason for it, then I'm sure you could probably find something interesting out.
By the way, all you a drink. Well, someday hopefully we can match.
Okay, I'll hold you to that.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries.
If no one wants to go, I guess I'll go next. Hi guys, thank you so much for that. It was really interesting from both of you. Mark, I think I know one of your colleagues, maybe Ian Plater.
Oh yeah, I know Ian, yeah.
A bit, I guess, more of a mentor role. So I was really interested in, I'm not so much of a gaming person, but I'm really interested in the narrative side of what you do, because that's always really interested me. I've come from a filmmaking background.
All right.
I'll ask is how does the added element of narrative weave into your general practice in general, and how cognizant do you need to be of the narrative arcs and the conventions of script writing and storytelling and all those classical writing structures?
Well, I'm a bit of a narrative nerd, so it's something I quite enjoy doing. I was actually talking to my I watched the second. This is completely a side point, but I think it's interesting. But I watched the second Hunger Games film last night for the first time, and I was wondering why it bothered me so much. And I think it's because the film didn't feel like it had a third act. because you have the essentially you have like the fallout from the first film, then you have another Hunger Games, and it kind of ends on a cliffhanger to set up the third film. So I think, yeah, for me, I was like, oh right, I think that might be why that's an issue. So I think, yeah, having an interest and a knowledge of it helps. I think what is nice about narrative is, like I said before, it's kind of the usability of the story. So I think a lot of it will come out somewhat naturally from the players. We have the points about character and overall story that I mentioned. They're kind of our go-to foundational questions, kind of similar to usability of knowing, do you know where to go and what to do and how to do it. So I think at least starting with that is a good starting point. And then from there, it's a case of kind of just digging in and kind of following up on what users say, because quite often, yeah, users can be obviously brutally honest with their feedback for user tests. So I think it's not essential, maybe, because I know that it's not like anything we've had official training in. Like, no one's done like a script writing degree, but it's something we can apply usability to. It's not to say that we can't improve ourselves by looking into like script writing courses and things like that. But as it's a service that is kind of like a secondary one, the majority of our time we're looking at usability and accessibility. It's not something we've put a lot of time into kind of looking at the moment. But like I say, I think with just the general understanding of just copying over what we know of user research and the kind of heuristics around that, I think you can get quite a lot out of narrative just by looking at it as a usability kind of format.
Thank you. It's interesting what you just said. Do you find that now you do UX and you're interested in narrative, that you can't enjoy a game or a film or a narrative at all without getting all technical with it? Because I find that now, since I've done my UX bootcamp or whatever.
Well, I was already highly critical about story narrative before we started doing it at work, so I think that one's just me. For games, not so much. I mean, the last game that I really struggled with for usability issues was Red Dead Redemption 2. I really didn't like that game, and I know that puts me in the minority, but I thought every single thing about that game was a usability issue. But for the most part, I'm generally okay when I play games. I think more often than not, I find interesting things or positive things. It's very rare that I'm sitting there overly criticizing a game for usability, except for Rockstar games. They seem to be just the worst.
Thanks for that. If anyone's interested in gaming UX roles, I just spotted one on LinkedIn. I just happened to do it, so I'll post it in the...
Hi, Mark. I have a question. So I'm a user researcher, and I work in often with fintech products and financial services for consumers.
Oh, yeah.
And often we're interested in gamification as a mechanic to increase engagement with a particular feature. So right now I'm actually just about to do some research on a credit card proposition that includes an element of gamification. And I wondered if you have any advice or tips for researchers on how to maybe, I don't know, like measure the impact of gamification on something like that.
It's not an area I've done that much work in. A lot of our, I think that's more of a question that someone who works in free-to-play is probably better equipped to answer. But from what I know, I think the main things you're looking at are, or would be, things around, and probably stuff you already know, to be honest, but just kind of engagement and retention. So how long are they using it? How frequently are they using it? Are they coming back to it, or where is the drop-off point? And if so, do you know what the trigger for that drop-off was? I think they would be some of the main areas that would be kind of crucial for kind of a gamification of something like a non-gaming service. But I mostly know it through kind of a gaming lens. So I don't know. Hopefully that was helpful. I don't know if there's anything else I can maybe help with on that.
Thanks. It's good to get that perspective. Yeah, we're looking at it from a sort of building rewards and how to gamify that. So achieving, unlocking rewards, unlocking levels, taking inspiration from traditional game design. And I guess I've noticed that as a trend actually in digital products generally, And I was curious if you had maybe other researchers or other people in product development approach you about the concept of gamification, because from where I'm sort of standing, it's becoming quite a lot of people are interested in it and how to utilize it.
Yeah, again, it's not something that Sony particularly does with the first party games. I think particularly for well, I think anything really with gamification, it's kind of avoiding that predatory nature, because that can kind of slip in. I know the games industry at large has a bit of an issue with microtransactions, and that kind of well, with that, it's more about kind of unlocking like timed exclusives and things like that. But I think things like progress bars and seeing that you're only 10 points away from getting the next thing, and knowing what that next thing is kind of a driver. But at the same time, I think it's that fine line between making it enjoyable and rewarding, but then also that kind of avoiding that kind of addictive side of things. I don't know how addictive things can get in fintech, but certainly for games like Candy Crush and things like that, I know they obviously can be quite addictive, and having things like lives that run out and stuff like that, but I guess that wouldn't necessarily be as appropriate. But I think in terms of just kind of letting users know what the next goal is and how to get there and how far away from it they are, I think that kind of thing is probably a good idea. I know an interesting thing, kind of a slight aside, but somewhat related, is we've just overhauled our trophy system for PlayStation. So are you aware of the trophies on PlayStation, just to start with?
Not exactly, no.
Okay,
I can sort of guess what it might be.
Okay, yeah. So every game has a set of trophies, and you unlock a trophy in a game for doing a certain thing. It might be for finishing level 1, or it might be for doing a combo move or whatever. And previously, the trophies went up from level 1 to level 99. And as you got higher and higher and higher, the progress bar would take longer and longer and longer to fill. So for an example, to go from level 1 to level 2, you need like 5 trophies. To go from level 33 to 34, you might need, a couple hundred trophies. They recently overhauled it to be level 1 to level 999, which means the trophy bar now fills up a lot quicker. So something like that, I can imagine, is kind of helping to gamify trophies more and increase the retention for trophies, because before, you'd kind of unlock a trophy and it wouldn't really move the bar on the progress. Now, in the last like week, I've gone up a trophy level, which would have otherwise taken me a couple of months, maybe even 6 months. So I think things like that, like the speed at which you are leveling up and unlocking rewards, albeit for trophies, it's just the number goes higher. But for something, I think, with a bit more substance, then like the speed at which you unlock things is probably also an interesting thing to look at.
Thanks a lot. That's really given me some ideas.
Yeah, no worries.
Great. So we're going to close the line now, but I just wanted to say really quickly, Mark, is there anything that you wanted to say to people in terms of socials or anywhere they can follow you? I
think, yeah, the only thing I mostly don't use social media. The only thing I do use is Twitter. So @MarcusFriend. You can find me on there. I mostly kind of use it for kind of semi-work related stuff. So it's mostly gaming news and accessibility related stuff. But if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me on there, and I'll do my best to answer.
That's great. Thank you again so much. And thank you so much to everyone who's still on the line. Hope you have a lovely rest of the evening. And we'll say goodbye now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.